Hello again, and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Friday the 11th of August. I'm Andrew Wilson, and this is Scotland at 7. This evening, I have the latest daily update from Ukraine on day 534 of the illegal Russian war of aggression and imperial ambition. Then I will introduce our guest for this evening, and then together we will take a look at today's headlines from Scotland and around the world. Air defences appear to have prevented Russian strikes on Kyiv this morning, with falling debris striking the city, but no casualties reported, according to Kyiv's mayor Vitaly Klitschko. Sergei Sobyanin, the mayor of Moscow, has said that nobody has been injured after a drone was downed over that city. Vnukovo Airport in Moscow was temporarily closed due to a drone in that region's airspace. And two people, a woman and a 44-year-old man, were injured when artillery fire hit the city of Kherson. Another man was injured in the region in a drone strike on Berislav. Ukrainian forces have recaptured the heights over Bakhmut and are successfully encircling Russian troops in the city, Hanna Maliar, the deputy defense minister in Kyiv, has said. She said that Russian soldiers could no longer move around Bakhmut in the eastern Donetsk region, and progress was being made in outflanking enemy forces after months of deadly battles. A Russian missile struck a hotel in the Ukrainian city of Zaporizhia yesterday evening, leaving 1 dead and 16 injured, Ukrainian officials have said. Zaporizhia Governor Yuri Malashko said the 16 injured included 4 children. UN staff used the hotel when they worked in the town, said Denise Brown, the humanitarian coordinator for Ukraine. This was the second strike on Zaporizhia in as many days. TASS has reported that Ukrainian forces have hit the occupied city of Horlivka in Donetsk with 4 cluster munitions. There were no details of any casualties. Russian authorities appear to have completely ruled out any Ukrainian involvement in the major explosion at the Zagorsk optical and mechanical plant in Sergeyev Posad, near Moscow. Interfax reports that a criminal case has been initiated on violation of industrial safety requirements, and the technical director of the Piroros company, which owned the warehouse where the explosion occurred, has been detained. 8 people are still reported to be missing, with 84 wounded. 1 person is known to have died. And the White House is asking Congress for an additional $24 billion in Ukraine aid, senior administration officials revealed yesterday. The US has so far given Ukraine more than $113 billion in aid since Russia invaded in February 2021, making it Ukraine's biggest funder in its defense against Russia by far. Now, we are lucky to be joined this evening by a regular contributor and friend of the programme, Linda Fabiani. Linda served as the SNP member of our Scottish Parliament representing East Kilbride from 1999 until she was lucky enough to retire at the Scottish election in 2021. When she retired, Linda was the Deputy Presiding Officer in our Parliament. Linda, good evening. How are you keeping?
Hello. I'm keeping absolutely fine. Thank you very much, Andrew.
Well, it's a pleasure to see you on Broadcasting Scotland this evening. It's been a wee while since you and I last spoke.
Yeah.
Our first item this evening is that all asylum seekers being housed on board the controversial Bibi Stockholm barge are being removed because of a potentially deadly bacteria in the water system. And that has been confirmed. Home Office sources said Legionella had been identified on the Bibi Stockholm, the 222-bedroom hulk hired by the Home Office as part of a £1.6 billion immigration deal. The first asylum seekers boarded on Monday, and by today there were 39 on board the vessel, which is docked in Portland in Dorset. People are at risk of contracting lung infections such as Legionnaire's disease or Pontiac fever if they breathe in small droplets of water in the air that contain the bacteria. A Home Office spokesperson said environmental samples from the water system on the Bibi Stockholm had shown levels of Legionella bacteria that required further investigation. They said that the samples related only to the water system on the barge, and there was no direct risk indication for the rest of Portland. They were not related to freshwater entering the vessel. Today's announcement follows reports yesterday from the Home Office that they had told an asylum seeker with TB that they were going to be moved onto the Bibby Stockholm barge. The doctor treating the asylum seeker is trying to prevent the move and has warned it could lead to a public health catastrophe. So, Linda, firstly, there's a number of angles on this story this evening. Firstly, Alex Bailey from the Say No to the Barge campaign group said that the news of the presence of Legionella in the water supply was, and I quote, another example of the haphazard, incompetent way our government is approaching this scheme from start to finish. So is Alex Bailey from the Say No to the Barge campaign group, is he right?
He's absolutely right. I mean, I think what we've been reading over the last few days, TB, then Legionella, but also remember, it's only within the last couple of weeks that the head of the local fire service said he had real safety concerns about the barge as well. But they just carry on regardless. And I think it is haphazard, but it's only one aspect of the haphazardness and indeed incompetence, and I would have to say downright cruelty that this current UK government exercises when it comes to asylum seekers. And, can I say, as part of this, it's always a strange pleasure to me to hear reports on Broadcasting Scotland that refer to asylum seekers, because that's what these folks are. And under international law, they have the right to apply for asylum. But the UK government insists on calling them migrants, and unfortunately, the mainstream press and media call them migrants as well. These are asylum seekers, and if there was a system in place that wasn't incompetent, uh, these people could be properly treated and taken through the system that should be in place. Unfortunately, it isn't in place, and it's all dog whistle stuff that goes on from this government. My belief is that it's quite calculated and cold, and it's to deflect from everything else that is going on within the UK government.
Thanks, Linda. Now you're ahead of me a little bit because I was going to also say that a spokesperson for another campaign group, Stand Up to Racism Dorset, has said that activists are heading to Portland to protest about the Home Office's treatment of asylum seekers, as we say,
Oh,
asylum seekers, or otherwise known as people. This is
mm.
the campaign group said this is yet another example of the Home Office's incompetence and inhumanity. So I was going to expand with you a wee bit, perhaps. What do you think
Yeah.
would be a competent and humane way to handle the claims of those who are seeking asylum or refuge here on Brexit Island?
Well, the first thing I would say is that there should be a system of safe passage for people to come. We don't have that. There should be honesty and there should be an adherence to international law and the UN conventions that the UK has in fact signed up to over the years. They ignore all that. If you take that as a basic principle, what you should then have is an adequately resourced system that allows applications for asylum to be dealt with very quickly whilst treating people humanely. That doesn't happen. The backlog is absolutely horrendous, and it has been for years. It's getting worse. But as I say, this government is using um, asylum seekers, what they call migrants. They are using them to create fear. They are using them to provide a cover for other things that are going on within the government. So, honesty right at the start, a decent system that is properly accessible to people and that quickly assesses applications. And let's never forget that actually the number of asylum seekers that come to UK is a small proportion compared to other places. And also, let's not forget that an awful lot of asylum seekers who are turned down after years end up winning on appeal. There is something rotten at the core of the system that is within the UK government. And instead of trying to scapegoat people, we should be treating them humanely and putting people through a system that is fair, transparent, and honest.
Thanks, Linda. Now, at the end of that item, we also mentioned the announcement that were reports about an asylum seeker who has TB, who the Home Office are trying to move on to the baby Stockholm. The Home Office has told an asylum seeker who has tuberculosis they're going to be moved there. The doctor treating the person is trying to prevent the move and has warned of a public health catastrophe in the making. Now, Dr. Dominic Metz, who's a GP for more than 250 asylum seekers currently in Oxfordshire, told the newspaper that 10 of his patients have received letters from the Home Office saying they're going to be moved to the barge. Some of his patients are awaiting surgery and others mental health support, which he fears could be disrupted by the move, and also one is under active treatment for latent TB, which could pose a public health risk if it became active and spread. Doctors are also concerned about potential outbreaks of other diseases like scabies and diphtheria, both of which have been detected in asylum seeker accommodation, and these diseases spread faster in crowded areas. Dr. Metz said, "I feel that these people are being treated like livestock, only slightly worse, as livestock are prohibited for being transported with active infection." Dr. Metz has got a point, doesn't he?
He absolutely has a point. I read his report the other day. I was absolutely horrified by it, Andrew. It's the fact that people are being treated this way. And these diseases, conditions that are getting talked about, they very often have their root in poverty. And asylum seekers are amongst the poorest people, in our society and in our world. We should never believe the right-wing press stuff about how asylum seekers are getting all these benefits and everything else. They're not. These people are poor. And I mean, I have to say, to broaden it out a bit, we're having a resurgence of some diseases and conditions within the UK as a direct result of poverty. But to then take people who are suffering from contagious diseases and putting them in a crowded place for accommodation is barbaric to the individual. But it is also very cruel to those round about, because you're saying to them, you don't matter enough. See, if you end up with this disease, well, that's fine, we'll deal with it. It's barbaric's the right word. It's horrendous, and I have great respect for Dr. Metz and all that he's trying to achieve. And he's not alone. I would say that most medical professionals would be of the same opinion as that GP.
I think that's a very fair point, Linda. Thank you. But we'll move on now to our second item this evening, because the UK economy grew a little faster than expected in the second quarter of this year, after growth was boosted by a recovery in car manufacturing and a surprisingly strong June. UK GDP increased by 0.2% in April to June, up from 0.1% in the previous 3 months. And that's the best quarterly reading in more than a year, according to the Office for National Statistics, the ONS. The data surprised economists, with a poll of them beforehand forecasting no growth in output during the quarter. The reading was helped by an unexpectedly strong performance in June, when output rose by 0.5%. GDP had fallen by 0.1% in May because of the extra bank holiday to celebrate the coronation of King Charles. However, the UK economy still remains 0.2% smaller than it was in the final quarter of 2019, before the onset of the coronavirus pandemic, which triggered the deepest recession on record. The cost of living crisis period of the last 18 months remains the weakest period outside of a recession for 65 years, the Resolution Foundation think tank pointed out, despite the UK economy dodging a technical recession, which is 2 consecutive quarters of declining GDP. The increase in output in the latest quarter was mainly due to an increase of 1.6% in manufacturing, the ONS said. It said falling prices of materials may be relieving some pressure on manufacturers. The largest positive contribution was from making transport equipment, after the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders reported a 16.2% increase in car manufacturing in June 2023 compared with the same month in 2022. Some analysts cautioned that the picture of the UK economy given by the June acceleration in output was overly flattering. The impact of the coronation bank holiday in particular makes the economy look stronger than it is, really, said Ruth Gregory, an economist at Capital Economics, a consultancy. So, Linda, firstly, the UK economy
Mm,
still remains smaller than it was in the final quarter of 2019,
mm.
before the pandemic, which triggered the deepest recession on record. So, this news about June doesn't really amount to very much, does it? We're still worse off than we were
Uh,
in the last quarter of 2019.
yeah, and we're 4 years down the line. I think I thought Ruth Gregory was interesting in what she said, as was the Resolution Foundation. I mean, yeah, okay, they're saying, oh, it's a 0.2% increase, but there was a 0.1% decrease the quarter before. So if you're down low, it's maybe a bit easier to look better the next time round. So we should never forget that, that statistics, and damn statistics, you can work out what you like from them. But I like the Resolution Foundation's stuff. They were talking about the bigger picture, and it is the bigger picture that matters. We may well have avoided a technical recession, as it's termed, but we still have the highest inflation in 40 years, didn't we? At its highest point. Um, I noticed they said we've got the weakest growth in 65 years outside a full-blown recession. And whilst it might not be a technical recession, there's an awful lot of people out there that feel like it's a recession. When you look at the interest rates that have gone up, when you look at the cost of living increases, people worried about losing their homes because of the mortgage rises, people cutting down on what they're eating. Uh, and even, it's affecting people in all walks of life. I was reading a report about how car insurance, for example, has absolutely rocketed, and probably other insurances as well, although I can't give examples. So it feels like a recession. People are having a seriously, seriously hard time. So I don't think it's any time at all for clapping hands and saying, oh, we've avoided a recession. Do you know what? You took us down there to start with. So don't be looking for kudos for doing rather well in a little quarter.
Thanks, Linda. Yes, it's a particularly low benchmark that we're talking about there,
Yeah.
but it struck me that inflation and jobs data will come up next week, and that will likely
Right.
make it clearer whether the Bank of England will raise rates, which are already at a 15-year
Mm,
high, yet again. As you were saying,
mm,
for millions of households forced to refinance their fixed rate mortgages at significantly higher rates, the pain is acute,
mm-hmm.
and it's not going to get any better
No.
anytime soon. And of course, those
Mm-hmm.
fixed rate mortgages also are then passed on through the rental sector to people who are renting and don't even have mortgages.
Uh-huh.
So, do you think
Yeah.
if the economy is not actually in a technical recession at the moment, and as you say, people are applauding that, does that make it more likely that the Bank of England will put up interest rates again next month, heaping more pain on borrowers and renters alike?
Do you know, Andrew, I have tried very, very hard to understand the logic of heating inflation and all the rest of it, and why interest rates should go up, why they shouldn't go up. And the more I read, the more confused I become about it. Um, I wish I could really understand how that all works and the logic behind it. But I have to say, I've read umpteen economists and they all disagree. So I'm not sure sometimes that even they understand it properly. Can it be understood? There must be so many things that happen that can't be forecast and all that stuff as well. But the bottom line is people are suffering. And I was interested today to read that the Scottish Government has put more money into advice services because folk like the Citizens Advice Bureau, the welfare advice agencies, money advice, they've got such an increase in worried people, usually about debt, coming to see them, that the Scottish Government yet again is mitigating the effects of the actions of the UK government. So things are dire. Will there be another interest rate increase? Probably. I couldn't begin to say I would know why or what effect it is likely to have.
Thanks, Linda. Now, we'll look at the cost of living crisis from a slightly different perspective now, because a modest wealth tax on the richest 140,000 people in the UK could raise more than £10 billion to help pay for public services. That's according to the Trades Union Congress, which is calling for a national conversation about taxing wealth. Research commissioned by the trade union umbrella body found that a one-off wealth tax of 1.7% on those with assets above £3 million, rising to 3.5% for those with more than £10 million, could deliver a £10.4 billion boost for the public purse. The TUC said the proposed levy would only affect the wealthiest 0.3% of the UK population and would not be extended to pension funds or pension income. It said while working people have been hit by a pay loss of historic proportions after the longest wage squeeze in modern history, the wealth of multimillionaires and billionaires has boomed. The number of UK billionaires has increased sharply since the coronavirus pandemic, from 147 in 2020 to 171 this year, each holding on average about £4 billion. There were 15 UK billionaires when the Sunday Times first published its rich list in 1990. The TUC's General Secretary Paul Nowak said, "It's time to start a national conversation about how we tax wealth in this country. Our broken tax system means those at the top are hoarding wealth and getting richer and richer, while working people struggle to get by. That is starving our economy of spending, as it's working people who spend their money on our high streets, and it's starving our public services of much needed funds." The research suggests the idea of introducing a tiered, one-off wealth tax that would not include pensions. The following was raised. People with more than £3 million would be hit with a marginal tax rate of 1.7%, which the TUC said would raise £2.7 billion for the public purse. On assets above £5 million, the tax rate would be 2.1%, raising another £3.2 billion, and above the £10 million threshold, the rate would rise to 3.5%, raising £4.6 billion. The TUC study, which was carried out by Landman Economics, is based on Spain's new solidarity tax on large fortunes. Wealth taxes have also been introduced in Norway and Switzerland. Norway's 1.1% tax on those with assets above 20 million Norwegian kroner, that's about £1.5 million, has apparently led to a record number of super rich people leaving the country. So, Linda, firstly, we know that during 13 years of Tory rule, wealth inequality has increased, with more and more money being hoarded by a smaller and smaller group of the extremely wealthy. So do you think, would this modest tax on wealth help to begin to close that inequality gap?
Well, it is modest. I mean, I've read the information. It's very modest. For me, I would hope it would be a commencement point and a start, rather than saying that would be it. It's interesting. Every few years, something comes up, and the TUC do very good work on it. I remember some years ago there was a proposals for. I remember talking at SNP conference in support of it many years ago. It was called the Tobin tax, and it was a potential tax on currency transactions, international currency transactions. So it wasn't just related to the UK. But every so often we have discussions about these things and nothing ever happens. And we still have the ridiculousness of tax as a proportion of income. So you have somebody working in an ordinary job, maybe a nurse, a teacher, somebody working in a supermarket, whatever, a manual labourer, who actually, although they've got maybe a lower tax rate in some aspects, when everything is based on income tax like that, it's a high proportion of income. Whereas at the other end of the scale, you get a billionaire who's carrying out financial investments all the time, and the proportion of tax that they pay on the money that's coming to them is much smaller. So it's actually a radical rethink of the whole tax system of the UK and taking it away from that absolute emphasis on income tax all the time. Because by focusing on income tax, they are hammering ordinary working folk and turning them into the scapegoats again. I've used the word already tonight, but one of the things that a Tory government does is create They set up people for everybody else to have a go at so that the bigger picture isn't looked at. The bigger picture is that post-pandemic, we have more billionaires than we had before. There's something very fundamentally wrong with a society that happens in. So I think, yes, there should be a conversation, but I think all potential taxes should be pulled into it. I mean, the Tories have been fighting against putting any increases in inheritance tax, etc. There's all these different things that can be looked at. Land tax for land holdings, property taxes. There's a lot could be discussed. But yes, I would like to see a quick implementation of wealth tax, if you like the TUC is saying, like other countries are implementing as a starting point. Would they leave? Maybe. But do you know what? I wouldn't be missing them. And I don't know if anybody else would either, to be honest.
That's a very good point, Linda. Thank you. And that's really useful insight as well with regard to the Tobin tax proposals from a few years ago. Thank you. But let's move on now, because the SNP has criticised UK plans for more NHS privatisation and cuts, calling instead for to boost NHS funding, as new analysis shows the UK lags behind its European neighbours on health spending. Independent analysis commissioned by the SNP using OECD data shows the UK government has lower health spending per person than almost every other country in northwest Europe. Last year, the UK government spent a third less per person on health than Germany and Norway, at £5,884 compared to £9,104 and £8,817 respectively. The analysis shows that in 2022, the UK government spent significantly less per head on health than almost all of our North European neighbours, £3,220 less per person than Germany, £2,933 less than Norway, £1,404 less than Switzerland, £1,355 less than France, £261 less than Ireland, and £35 less per person than Finland. In addition, the research shows that the UK spent around a fifth less per person on health than the average of other countries across northwest Europe, at £3,831 per head as an average, compared to £4,714. Across the UK, the analysis shows that the Scottish Government spends the most on health per person. In 2021-22, the SNP government spent almost 10% more per person on health than the Tory government spent in England. Across Britain, health spending was £3,490 per head in Scotland, £3,189 in England, and £3,461 in Wales. Since the SNP was elected to government in 2007, health spending in Scotland has been consistently higher than the other UK nations. On average, the SNP government has spent an extra £143 per person on health in Scotland. The King's Fund Health think tank has reported that the UK underperforms significantly in tackling the biggest killer diseases because the NHS has been weakened by years of Tory underinvestment. A King's Fund study found life expectancy in the UK is the second worst amongst the 19 countries studied. The Labour Party has been criticised by doctors and health experts for its plans to expand the involvement of the private sector in the NHS. Commenting, the SNP health spokesperson, Martin Day MP, said, "Despite plastering lies on the side of a Brexit bus, the Tories have chronically underfunded the NHS, and the UK lags behind our European neighbours on health funding and outcomes." The SNP is calling for the Tories and pro-Brexit Labour to raise UK government health spending to the much higher levels seen across our neighbours in Northern Europe. Even raising spending to just the average level across North Europe would deliver billions of pounds extra for the Scottish Government to spend on boosting Scotland's NHS. So, Linda, that was alluded to in a couple of ways in that piece, and I was going to ask you, after 13 years of chronic underinvestment in our health services at a UK level, what do you think are the impacts on the health outcomes for our young people and for the life expectancy of older people?
It's a big question, Andrew. Oh, yeah. It has been chronically underfunded. It continues so to be. This study, gives the proof of that, the hard evidence of that. An OECD study. And when you first started introducing this item, I couldn't help but think of the irony of discussing this when the last item we discussed was that following the worst pandemic since the First World War, when there was a flu pandemic in the 20s, following that pandemic, what everyone went through, the level of death, the level of ongoing both physical and mental health issues from that, we have more billionaires than ever before, but we have lower health spending than so many of our neighbours, including Ireland. What will the outcomes be? I think it'll be a while before they show. We all know that there are COVID issues ongoing. People are still contracting COVID. We know that long COVID is a big problem. There are more and more people being diagnosed with the ongoing effects of COVID. And we know that there are mental health issues and that we do not have adequate funding coming from the UK government to be able to address all these things. So yes, I have concerns about my own age group. I'm an elderly person these days, but people much older than me who are very, very worried about the way that the health service is going, who are getting no comfort at all from Keir Starmer's announcements and the Labour Party's position in that stuff. But I think a really big issue is upcoming generations. If we continue to underfund the UK Health Service, and when I say that, what I mean is the UK funding that goes into it and then is broken down into the component parts of England, Scotland, Wales, and the north of Ireland, because Scotland's funding on it is largely dependent on what's spent in England on funding, the way that the Barnett confidentials work and the Barnett formula. So unless there is an increase in that, I have concerns about upcoming generations, both in terms of physical and mental health. And I recognise that the Scottish Government is doing very, very well in spending more than the other component parts of the UK. The SNP government, particularly since 2007, since the SNP government came in, it's consistently higher per person than in the rest of the UK. But again, it's that issue about you can only mitigate so far. And whilst people are always calling for more money for the health service, that has to be taken from other places. And all these things are linked into well-being. If you take money from housing to put into the health service, you end up with bad housing that puts more people needing the services of the health service. All these things are interlinked. So I just wish that we were in a position to make our own decisions, whether it be in the money we raise or the money we spend. And for me, it's only an independent Scotland that can achieve that.
Thanks, Linda. That's some great perspective. Thank you. Now then, the UK government's investment in renewable energy has lagged significantly behind the rest of the world in recent years, according to an analysis of global data. The latest government figures reveal the UK's renewable capacity has fallen to an average increase of 4.45% in the past 3 years, compared with an average 9.67% annual increase globally. The analysis follows the UK government's announcement that it will approve more than 100 new oil and gas licences in the North Sea. In the UK, total renewable capacity grew by 1.96% in 2020, well down from the 24.26% growth recorded in 2015. The rest of the world recorded much higher levels of growth in renewable capacity compared with the UK in the last 3 years. In 2020, renewable capacity grew by an average of 9.67% increase, more than double that of the UK over the same period. Roger Fouquet, a senior research fellow at the Energy Studies Institute in the National University of Singapore, said that as countries such as Iceland move towards 100% renewable energy, its investment is likely to slow down, only increasing to meet the rising demand for power. However, he noted that the UK cannot compare. The UK's current renewable electricity capacity is below 50% and has a great deal of further investment to undertake to claim to be a leader in low-carbon energy systems. In fact, 45% of European economies have a higher share of renewable electricity capacity, Fouquet said. So, Linda, it rather looks like the Tories would prefer new oil fields, both offshore and onshore, and to start fracking and maybe start mining coal again, rather than build solar farms and wind turbines. Why do you think that's the case? Is it self-interest? Is it disinterest? Or is it incompetence?
Oh, I don't think it's incompetence for once. I think a lot of what they do is incompetent. I don't think this is. I think there's a degree of self-interest. I mean, it's only this week we found out there's more former Tory government ministers who have not declared interests in the oil and gas sector. Uh, I think, there's big lobbyists in that sector. And I think the Tories listen to big lobbyists. Again, that might be motivated by self-interest. I think there's also a degree of populism. Um, that thing they do about putting out scare stories about, for example, we'll all end up sitting in the dark with the odd wee candle freezing with quilts round us unless we give out more oil and gas licenses. They haven't properly looked at what everyone's now calling a just transition. I thought Stephen Flynn, the SNP Westminster leader's comments on that at the time were very apposite, and he represents the Northeast. And they have stopped that, they're turning the investments away from renewables. They are claiming that putting money into nuclear is cheaper. It's not, in capital spend and subsidies, and they're calling that renewable, if you like. But what I find really interesting about all of this is, the comments that are being made are about on a UK basis, and the UK is way lagging behind. It's appalling. But if you extract Scotland from that and start looking at what's actually been achieved in Scotland, and indeed the potential that Scotland has, Scotland making its own decisions could be Iceland, could be Norway, looking to our Nordic neighbours for the way forward and being part of that. The UK is not interested in that at all. And again, Scotland is sacrificed for the interests of those in London, is the bottom line.
Thanks, Linda. And I think, without just for clarity, it was David Duguid, I think you were referring to there, whose wife holds £50,000 worth of shares in BP,
Is that right?
and there was
Well,
no
there was
declaration.
another one as well. There was
There are
another one
lots
during
of
the
them.
week. Some
But
wifey, I
Mr.
can't
Mr.
remember her name.
Theresa
Was it
Villiers was
Teresa?
one of those. But David Duguid
Yeah,
and his
yeah.
wife sprang to mind as being the local
Yeah, well,
representatives. But
I'm
let's
sure
let's move on.
there'll be a few of many.
That's a fair point, Linda. Thank you. Now, the US Energy Department has announced it is awarding up to $1.2 billion to two projects to directly remove carbon dioxide from the air, a fledgling technology that some climate experts worry will distract and undermine efforts to phase out fossil fuels. The process, known as direct air capture, does not yet exist on a meaningful scale, and the move was seen as the US government taking a big bet. Coming after July was confirmed as the hottest month ever recorded on Earth. Countries are currently not cutting planet heating emissions enough to avoid disastrous global warming of 2 degrees C or more above pre-industrial times. This shortfall means that planting forests and developing machines that can suck carbon directly from the air will be required to remove billions of tons of greenhouse gases, according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC. But Hosung Lee, the chair of the IPCC, recently warned that carbon capture was no free lunch and that countries should be wary. The most recent IPCC report was published in March and warned it was now or never to take action on emissions, with the world on the brink of irrecoverable damage. Reacting to the news of the US investments by the Biden administration earlier today, some experts were worried the technology was being used as a fig leaf by the fossil fuel industry. The projects selected for Energy Department backing are Project Cypress, which will be built in Louisiana, and the South Texas DAC Hub, which is planned for Kleberg County, Texas. Jennifer Granholm, the US Energy Secretary, talked up the potential of the technology in a press conference call. If we deploy this at scale, this technology can help us make serious headway towards our net zero emission goals while we are still focused on deploying more clean energy at the same time, she said. Shannon Bottcher, the professor of chemistry at the University of Oregon, said direct air capture technologies are not yet cost effective, but are worth some investment in research and development. Jonathan Foley, the executive director of Project Drawdown, a group that publicises climate solutions, said, "What worries me and a lot of other climate scientists is that it potentially creates a fig leaf for the fossil fuel industry. The idea that we can keep burning stuff and remove it all later." The Biden administration delivered a historic climate bill last August through the president's record on the climate, although the president's record on the climate has been undercut by his aggressive giveaway of oil and gas drilling leases on public land, including the controversial Willow oil project in Alaska. So, Linda, I was going to compare a little bit, whilst the technologies are slightly different. This is direct air removal, whereas in Scotland it's carbon capture, which puts the carbon back under the ground. In Scotland, according to Professor Stuart Hazeldine, who's the Professor of Carbon Capture and Storage at Edinburgh University, he said that announcing more carbon capture schemes at the same time as approving, in our case, 100 plus new oil and gas drilling licenses is like ordering a truckload of cigarettes for someone who's trying to give up smoking. Hazeldine said carbon capture should be part of a package of things that you have to do, increasing renewables to switch on energy from burning gas and oil, doubling or even quadrupling the amount of electricity we have now, building more efficiency in how we use our energy with insulation. It should be part of this package. So do you think, is there any chance that a Tory government will design, let alone be able to implement, a package that even resembles what Professor Hazeldine at the University of Edinburgh is recommending?
Oh gosh, if only. I suspect again, they seem to do everything on a very reactive, keep our pals happy basis. Try and get the popular vote basis without properly looking at what was it Dr. Hazeltine, I think you said, is talking about
Professor.
looking at the professor. Oh gosh, I'm downgrading him. I hope he's not listening, Andrew. um, Professor Hazeltine, it's quite right. Of course he is. You have to look at the bigger picture all the time. And it's back to what we were talking about the licenses given out by them, what Stephen Flynn was saying. They're not truly looking at any kind of just transition and a full package. They are just announcing things willy-nilly. And I wonder, I was trying to read into the stuff that President Biden has announced. And as a lay non-scientist person, I'm looking, and the first thing that struck me was, so you take it out the air, so you just keep pumping it into the air and then you take it out. What's that about? Surely that should be part of a bigger package as well. And I thought it was quite amusing that one of the first, what they're calling first sites, and they look like national rollout if it's successful, is in Texas of all places, where they pump so much out into the air. And yes, I can see why people are saying it might be a fig leaf for the industries. And when it comes to renewables, when it comes to zero, net zero, we've had lots of fig leaves. I can't remember what it was called, but remember all the rage at one point was the air, when you flew in an aircraft, you were able to buy credits and swap them here and swap them there. And you can build so many, not build, you don't build trees, you can plant so many trees that gives you less of a conscience about your emissions. All that stuff. There's been a lot of fig leaves over the years. But the bottom line is exactly what Professor Hazeldine was saying. The broader package, and let's look at electricity now. I haven't seen anybody saying this at any great length, but our electricity infrastructure in so many of our communities is inadequate to cope with, for example, everybody in the community having an electric car and charging it at home at the same time at night. So there's the UK has underinvested in infrastructure for decades. We know that. And I think a lot of that is now coming to the fore and coming to light. And they're trying to hide it by coming out with all this different stuff. Maybe they're frightened to do what Professor Hazeldine says and look at the bigger picture and bring all the components into it, because there will be the proof of the infrastructure underinvestment over so many years.
Thanks, Linda. That's a very good point. The continuing underinvestment is storing up problems that will become even more difficult to address. But let's move on now, because the conservative US Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas has been condemned for maintaining unprecedented and shameless links to right-wing benefactors after ProPublica published new details of his acceptance of undeclared gifts, including 38 vacations and expensive sports tickets. Pramila Jayapal, a Washington state Democrat and chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, called Clarence Thomas's actions unprecedented, stunning, and disgusting. Jayapal said it was the height of hypocrisy to wear the robes of a Supreme Court justice and take undisclosed gifts from billionaires who benefit from your decisions. 38 free vacations, yachts, luxury mansions, skyboxes at events. Resign, she wrote. From the Senate, Dick Durbin of Illinois, and the Democratic Judiciary Committee chair, said the latest revelation of unreported lavish gifts to Justice Clarence Thomas makes it clear these are not merely ethical lapses. This is a shameless lifestyle underwritten for years by a gaggle of fawning billionaires. Supreme Court justices are nominally subject to the ethics rules for federal judges, but in practice they govern themselves. Durbin said that Thomas and Samuel Alito, another arch-conservative justice who did not declare gifts, had made it clear they are oblivious to the embarrassment they visited on the highest court in the land. Durbin said, now it's up to the Chief Justice, John Roberts, and the other justices to act on ethics reform to save their own reputations and the court's integrity. If the court will not act, then Congress must continue to. Chief Justice Roberts has rejected calls to testify, saying Congress cannot regulate his court. Durbin has advanced ethics reform, but its chances are virtually nil, with Republicans opposed in the Senate and already in control of the House. Thomas denies wrongdoing, claiming never to have discussed with his benefactors politics or business before the court, and to have been wrongly advised about disclosure requirements. Nonetheless, condemnation has been widespread. Adam Schiff, a House Democrat running for the Senate in California, said the scope of Justice Thomas's undisclosed receipt of luxury vacations from billionaires takes your breath away, as does this court's arrogant disregard for the public. Every other federal court has an enforceable code of ethics. The Supreme Court needs the same. Clarence Thomas joined the court in 1991, becoming the second black justice in place of the first, Thurgood Marshall. So, Linda, I remember very clearly a Court of Session judge in Edinburgh, before a judicial review case began, telling the court in public that he happened to be a member of the RSPB. The RSPB were parties to the case. Now, in that case, the Senator of the College of Justice said that he would step aside if the parties wanted him to, even though he was just a member of a charity. Now, so isn't that maybe the point here? It's the lack of proper disclosure, transparency, that's the problem in this case, as much as the lavishness of the gifts which Clarence Thomas has received.
Absolutely. You know, there's certain people within society, and the US is similar to ours in that regard, although we've been eroding ours as well over the last few years. But there's certain people within society that you expect to hold high standards, and that in fact you hold to a higher standard than anyone else because they are representing people. And the judiciary are part of that. We should be able to have faith in our judiciary and all the players within it, that they are honest, trustworthy, and upstanding. And I mean, this man, I was reading about some of the stuff he's taken. I mean, it's a nonsense that he thought it was okay. That's just I'm trying to find a word that isn't rude because it's it's just so appalling. The level of uh, gifts, graft, whatever you want to call it, that he has been party to is huge. And the idea that he thought it was acceptable to accept all that and not declare any of it is just a complete nonsense in my mind. And he should go straight away. I mean, I was reading what he's like. You know, he's a very right wing judge appointed by George W. Bush. And he's what they call an originalist, which means that he thinks the Constitution should be interpreted as it was first written. Well, my understanding, it was fairly honourable people that wrote that original Constitution. And so it seems to me that he thinks that the Constitution should be in its original form when he's holding judgment on other people. It's about time he had a good look at himself, because the time has come where other people are now judging him, and he's found wanting.
Very well, and very succinctly put, Linda. Thank you. Now, our final item this evening is that students at the University of St Andrews are more positive about their education than students at any other mainstream university in the UK, according to the results of the National Student Survey published this week. Scotland's oldest university came top in the UK on an average positivity score of answers to the 26 questions which the National Student Survey puts to thousands of undergrads at universities across the UK. The National Student Survey questions cover students' opinions on teaching quality, assessment and feedback, support for mental health, and other facilities. St Andrews students had an average positivity measure of 87.2%, ahead of the University of West London on 85.9% and the University of Surrey on 85.4%. St Andrews also came top in the UK for teaching quality with a positivity score of 93.2%. The Vice Principal Education, Claire Peddy, said, "I am delighted by these results that confirm our commitment to the very highest standards of learning, teaching, and the unique student experience we offer at St Andrews. Today's results are a testament to the collaborative approach of the university, the Students' Association, staff, and students to ensure a positive learning and teaching environment where students feel supported and can thrive." She went on, St Andrews offers students the highest quality support, direct contact with some of the best researchers in the world, an international and diverse community, unique traditions, a wide range of extracurricular activities, and world-class facilities. So, Linda, reflecting very much what the Vice Principal said, the President of the Students' Association, Barry Will, said, "This endorsement from our students reflects the hard work and dedication of our entire community, from our dedicated staff who have persevered through big challenges in the last years to deliver a world-class education, to our international and diverse student community." So is that perhaps the answer here, as explained both by the Vice Principal and by the President of the Students' Association? If you get the entire community working together, good things will likely be the result.
Well, yeah, I think that's valid in any walk of life. So it'll be valid there. I mean, good on them. They've done very, very well here. It is quite a privileged university. Um, yeah, but they have done well, and we shouldn't forget there's been some issues over the last few years in St Andrews. You know, relevant to some of the things that are now scored. So if they've pulled themselves up by the bootstraps, worked together, and got that result, good on them. I mean, the other thing that I found interesting, though, and I couldn't find it, it's really annoying me. Maybe the full thing's not out yet. I read somewhere that 4 out of the top 10 in this survey across the UK were Scottish universities. I read that somewhere, and I cannot find the figures. So maybe the full report's not out yet, but I look forward to seeing that. And if that's the case, that's brilliant as well.
That's great, Linda. Thank you. Yes, I think there was a ranking in June 2023, in June this year, from the Complete University Guide, but there's more rankings and
Oh.
more surveys due to come out as well. But thank you, because I'm afraid that's all that we have time for this evening. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland depends on the generosity of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news, current affairs and culture. Please help us to continue to make these programmes and to continue to make new programmes for you. Our programmes will always be free to view, but if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. Right now, we have a very pressing need to raise £30,000 to pay our bills and to ensure that we can continue making programmes. We're now £250 short of £11,000 so far, but we really need to raise the remaining £19,250 as soon as possible. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment as a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, thank you very much. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our work. If you would like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot and send us a message there. You can find us on Twitter at BroadcastScot, and you can find us on Facebook by searching for Broadcasting Scotland. While you're watching us on YouTube, it would be great if you would like and subscribe to Broadcasting Scotland on that platform. We will be back at 12 noon sharp on Sunday for the next edition of the Full Scottish, so please come back and join us then. I'd like to thank everyone who's been watching this evening, and of course, I'd like to say a very special thanks to our very special guest, Linda Fabiani. Thanks, Linda.
Thank you.
On this day in 1586, Mary Queen of Scots was arrested after writing a letter seemingly approving of the plots to kill Queen Elizabeth of England. Mary was already being held in England and was arrested and taken to Tixall Hall in Staffordshire after being implicated in the Babington plot. This happened because a number of Mary's letters were discovered that were extremely incriminating. Francis Walsingham had arranged for Mary's letters to be smuggled out of the manor house at Chartley where she was being held. Mary was under the impression that her letters were secure, but this was not the case. Instead, her letters were all being read by Walsingham. They revealed a number of detailed plots to take the throne from Elizabeth and showed that Mary supported the death of Darnley. Modern historians are unsure whether these letters were truly written by Mary or whether they were forgeries created to remove Mary's threat to Elizabeth's throne completely. Regardless, their discovery led to Mary being tried for treason. Mary was adamant that the charges were false. She argued that she had been denied the opportunity to see the incriminating evidence and was given no access to legal advice. Mary also argued that as a foreign anointed queen, she had never been an English subject and therefore could not be convicted of treason in England. On the 25th of October, Mary was sentenced to death. Please look after yourselves, don't lose your head, and please have a very peaceful weekend. Bye-bye.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Lewis McGlynn.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Saoirse Healy.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stewart. Broadcasting Scotland is Scotland's independent broadcaster, providing factual news, reporting on the issues important to the people of Scotland.
We are committed to public service broadcasting, and with your support, we will produce even more programmes.
Provide opportunities for young people interested in media production and broadcasting, and challenge preconceptions of what Scottish media looks like, amplifying Scotland's voice and reflecting its communities.
We can already deliver high-quality live news, and we will create the highest quality programmes for you to enjoy. But we can only do that with your support.
So please subscribe to and share our channel or donate to Broadcasting Scotland via the link in the description. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.